Hey everyone, let's talk comic book minutia. This is the omnibus of Walt Simonson Thor that me and my daughter get out of the library on a regular basis because she loves looking at the sound effects in this comic book. These 48 comic books. Walt Simonson loved to put sound effects all over the place in these comic books, and with lots of variety. Varum, slam. As you get going, I probably won't find good examples now that I'm looking. There's just sound effects all over the place, and he keeps coming up with different ones. But Doom, he keeps coming back to Doom, and the sound effects are kind of built into the pictures in a certain way, or part of the kind of graphic effect that Simonson was going after. But my daughter, at 4 and 5, just loves Scracket Kabathum. Just loves looking at these sound effects. I mean, we could literally, at times, spend a half hour, 40 minutes paging through this and looking at all the sound effects. I don't know if it's the novelty of sound and letters and the connection between them. Doom, that particularly appeals to a child. Bada boom, Cthulhu. It goes on and on. Crack-a-lack-a-tack-a. Room. Well, a lot of rooms. And a lot of dooms. Slatter. I can't tell while I'm looking what's showing on the camera. Sorry about that. But anyway, and it reminds me of how one of the things that I loved about the Batman TV show with Adam West was when the whole screen would be taken over with a panel that said pow or crack or wham or whatever. That just sort of screamed out comic book excitement to me at the time. So I suppose in a way, these visual word sound effects are kind of like a symbol of comic books, or not a symbol, what's the word? But they're just like a key thing of comic books that people think about. I think this may be the wrong volume of Arcane, but my daughter and I spent a lot of time searching through this manga-ized take on the Miyazaki movie, The Secret World of Arcane, because she enjoyed the way they did sound effects. They would do a lot of sound effects that were just TMP, and they're all very small, so that fascinated her also. These small little sound effects, kind of hidden away grin in the pictures. Chack, Timp. This was the one we would find everywhere. Whoops. There it go. Having trouble with cameras. There it is. TMP. I don't know how you pronounce that. We eventually called it Timp. And all over the place, wherever someone would take a step, would be Timp, Timp, Timp. Just tiny little sound effects all over the place. And that really excited my daughter, too. But I was talking the other evening with old Travis, Oddfellow Thoughts, and somehow the subject of sound effects came up, and I said I thought I didn't even think most of the comic books I read had sound effects in them anymore. And I looked through a few, and I guess I was wrong, because even Saga has sound effects in them, but not a lot. There's the one that I found looking at the most recent issue, Whump. But there is no, there's no sound effect when someone's being punched there. And I don't feel the need for a sound effect there, but I don't know if I need that whump. Although Travis wisely pointed out that that these sound effects really help in a static, still image to give the sense of movement, to know that this thing fell down heavily. It may help to say whump there. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I need that whump or not. And then I thought, well, actually, as kind of a base, a kind of standard comic, I thought I'll pull out The Eternals by Jack Kirby from the, mid or late 70s. And there indeed are sound effects, blam. They aren't crash, wham, just as you would expect them to be. I think Walt Simonson was playing off of that and trying to do something new with it, and a nod to the comic bookiness of it all. So then I thought, well, I don't think Greg Rucka uses sound effects, so I was looking through Punisher. He just, because he hardly uses words at all. There's a lot of wordless pages. But look there, what's that, ding or dink? That's a small sound effect. But there, bracka, bracka, bracka. I was quite surprised to discover sound effects in this comic book, which in my mind wouldn't have sound effects. And there, boom, it's kind of integrated into the whole picture there, which I think is a great way to do it when you do sound effects. Do I need sound effects in this comic book? I don't know. Here, all over the place, the sound of the gunfire, chaka chaka, brack brack, brack brack, tink tunk. I don't know. Does that help these images? Does it bring it back to comic bookiness when some of it's so sort of cinematic and realistic looking that it seems less like a comic book? Here's another kind of, oops, where'd it go? That's not what I want. Pardon me, I thought I had a comic book at the tip of my fingers, which I did not. Oh, here it is. EC Comics. This is a reprint of Crime Suspense Stories #1. Very famous comic books from the 50s. Sort of thought of as one of the peak periods of comic book creativity. I don't think there's any sound effects in here. And I assume that they had invented sound effects by the 50s in comic books. I mean, that's probably, the 50s comic books is probably what the Adam West Batman was based on. Oh, crash, snap. Oh, I'm wrong. But you don't see a lot of sound effects in these EC. I think those are, last time I flipped through this book, I didn't see any. So mostly these stories are told fine without sound effects, but I'm wrong that there's none. There's scrape. So maybe that's necessary, because who could tell that the boat was scraping against something in that picture unless you put the word scrape there. So what about something kind of cartoony, like very modern, but in very much comic booky, like FF? Let's see, is there any sound effects there? Kids playing in water. I don't see any splashes yet. This is not a big action issue, I suppose, in terms of violent action that would call for sound effects. Oh, there's a little splish, swish. Oh, that's nice. Kersploosh, written in the splashing water itself. I like that. But it seems surprising that there aren't more sound effects in this one. But that one wasn't drawn by Michael Allred. Maybe it's different in an issue drawn by him. I haven't looked at all of these. Oh yeah, look at that. Very comic booky, built right in with even the coloring done to remind you of old comic books. Pop. Of course, that really goes well with The Impossible Man, the main antagonist of this issue, to have lots of sound effects. Although I'm not seeing it on it everywhere. You might have made a sound effect there, but oops. I'm having trouble realizing what's on camera and what's not. So, not as sound effect heavy as I might have expected this particular comic book to be, but definitely use sound effects when they feel it's necessary. I wonder is it always the writer who decides on the sound effects? I suppose it could often be the author. Arcane, 3D. It could be the editor, or it could be perhaps even the artist, because, like in some of these examples we've seen, the sound effect really is part of the art. No sound effect there where he's ripping a rabbit in half. Would it take away from the horror of an issue like this one to have too many sound effects? Well, there's a bang, just in case you didn't know that gun was going off. I still would argue that sound effects are not, to me, they, for the most part, don't seem necessary in comic books for adults, although maybe it just makes it fun for all of us, but because it certainly does obviously appeal to children. But other than that bang, I think there's no sound effects in this Arcane issue number 1. Just love the artwork in this. This one I had meant to include in my example of some really good one-and-done things I've read recently in a previous video. How about the brothers Hernandez in their Love and Rockets type of books? Do they use sound effects? Yep. Whack. That's kind of what she's shouting, I guess. So there do seem to be a modest amount of sound effects in these. They are quite comic booky, I guess, in their indie way. Godland by Joe Casey and Tom Scioli, which is kind of a tribute to Jack Kirby, cosmic kind of artwork and storylines. I would expect a lot of sound effects here. Again, this is not one I've previewed. I'm not immediately seeing any sound effects. Like there, you would expect a giant sound effect. In fact, maybe that would be better with a sound effect, or maybe I don't need it. This is interesting. What does have sound effects and what doesn't? Reminds me I want to go back and finish reading this series. It was really quite wacky. Yeah, 0 sound effects that I can find in here. That's surprising. This, I would think, would be the obvious thing to have sound effects. Classic Jim Steranko Shield from the what was it? The either late 1960s or very early 1970s. I think late 1960s. This is kind of a famous, because I guess back then to do 2 pages without any words was pretty radical. No sound effects there. You might have expected one when Nick Fury's kicking this Hydra agent. Any others? See, I think he was pretty confident that you would get the idea there from the image without the sound effect. But here is a sound effect that travels through the panel with Nick Fury, kind of becomes part of the visual layout. But for the most part, we're not seeing many sound effects here. Which is a bit surprising, actually. I would have thought more in the way of sound effects for this kind of... Because Steranko was very, in my mind, very pop art, purposefully pop art. And the big sound effects seem to me like a pop art kind of natural thing. But it looks like other than that one set of panels, I'm not finding any special effects, despite all the big action. So that's very, whoops, there's a special effect. There, and there. So I guess he used it sometimes, but not a whole lot. He didn't usually. Here's one. Tap, tap, tap. So not as much as you would expect, but used at times. Can't find any there. So this is interesting for me. If you're still here, thanks for joining my trivia. Here's some of the original version of Bone in black and white. Hiss. Wump. Special sound effects seem natural for something like this, which is so cartoony. And they are nicely thump part of the art. And this is, I imagine he was even doing his own lettering. I could be wrong, but anyhow, just a few more I want to look at. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I have not previewed this to see. I would imagine no special effects in here. And none so far in lots of places where you might think there would be. Is it a matter of trusting your artist? Or trusting your readers? Or just a matter of style? Yeah, so Alan Moore and his collaborator, whose name I always forget, Kevin O'Neill, even though I love Kevin O'Neill art, I never remember his name. They seem to use 0 sound effects. Oh, except, no sound effects there, that's blood. Yep, 0 sound effects. So that's interesting. You can do it without sound effects. If Alan Moore can do it. Prophet. Oh, definitely sound effects. Here I thought there might not be. I haven't read this volume yet. There's sound effects. Crackle. Yeah, so I don't have it right on me, but it would be interesting to find Brendan Graham's own comic books that he drew and see if those are full of sound effects. Here's a sound effect going right off the page. That's kind of cool. I'm bouncing around here emotionally about whether I would like sound effects in comics. For whatever reason right now, I'd rather not have sound effects in comics. This is Simon and Kirby's early young romance comics that I just got out of the library for fun. Now, you wouldn't necessarily expect sound effects in romance comics, and I don't see any, not even a smooch. Oops, smooch. Yeah, so I don't know if this was a sign of the times or just the type of comic book they were doing that they put no sound effects in it. I wish I had a Simon and Kirby from the 40s or 50s that was superheroes to see if those had sound effects. But I'm afraid I don't. So I'm gonna... Oh, this would be a natural for sound effects. Frankenstein, Agent of Shade, and there are some sound effects. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Scream! Yeah. Good times. I don't know. Do I want sound effects or do I not? Okay. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.